A white police officer arrests a black man outside the courthouse, accusing him of being aggressive, uncooperative, and suspicious. But what he doesn't know is that the man he just handcuffed is Harrison Cole, a high-ranking federal prosecutor. Harrison isn't just walking into court as a defendant, he's stepping in with a mission to turn this arrest into a reckoning. When the tables turn in the courtroom, how far will the system go to protect its own, and can one man make it answer? If this caught your attention, don't forget to like, share, and follow along because what unfolds next will shake the courtroom to its core. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning. Harrison Cole, dressed in a fitted navy suit with polished Oxfords and a briefcase buckled neatly on the passenger seat, was cruising toward the courthouse with nothing but jazz on the radio and motions in his mind. No speeding, no swerving, no traffic light missed. Just a black man in a luxury sedan with tinted windows in a neighborhood that wasn't used to seeing both at once. He noticed the police cruiser in his rearview mirror half a block back. Nothing unusual. But when the cruiser shifted lanes and stayed behind him for 3 full intersections, Harrison's fingers lifted instinctively from the steering wheel and hovered midair. Then the lights flashed, sharp and impatient. One short siren blast, not for warning, but for control. He pulled over. Calmly, turned down the music, retrieved his license and registration before the officer even approached. That wasn't new. What came next, however, unraveled fast. Officer Jake Warren walked up to the driver's side window. Posture taut, one hand resting on his belt, like it was waiting for something to go wrong. He didn't introduce himself. Didn't ask how Harrison was doing. Just leaned in low and stared into the car. "You in a rush this morning?" Jake asked. "No, sir," Harrison replied evenly. "Is there a reason I was pulled over?" Jake ignored the question, glancing into the back seat. Then at Harrison's suit. Then at the Rolex on his wrist. He squinted. "This your car?" "It is." "You rent it?" "No, sir. I own it. My name's on the title." Jake took the license and registration from Harrison's hand without a word. He stood back and began flipping through them slowly like he didn't trust the paper itself. Harrison kept both hands on the wheel, still. Visible, silent. Jake looked back up. "You live around here?" "Not far." Jake tilted his head. "Funny. I patrol this area every day. Don't think I've ever seen you before." "I haven't done anything wrong," Officer Harrison said calmly. "If there's a traffic violation, I'm happy to address it, but otherwise," Jake's voice cut in harder now. "You think dressing like that and driving this car makes you untouchable?" Harrison blinked once, his voice steady. "No. I think it makes me a citizen with rights." Jake leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Step out of the car." "On what basis?" Jake snapped. "Get out, now!" Harrison didn't move. His voice sharpened. "Am I being detained or am I free to go?" Jake's hand dropped, lower fingers brushing his taser. "You're stalling." "That's resisting." "I'm asking a legal question." "You don't get to question me." "I'm not resisting. I'm complying." "But you haven't told me what I've done." "You're making this harder than it needs to be. I could say the same to you." Silence stretched between them, taut electric. Then Jake yanked open the door. "Out of the car, now." Harrison stepped out slowly. Not with fear, with clarity, with the full awareness of what this looked like and how far it could go. He stood taller than Jake expected, face composed, chin high. He glanced briefly at the dashboard camera on the cruiser, then directly into Jake's eyes. "You're escalating this for a reason that doesn't exist," he said. Jake spat the words like venom. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "For what charge?" Jake grabbed his wrist and twisted. "I said turn around. I'm not resisting. You people never just cooperate, do you?" That stopped everything. For a split second, the world quieted. Not because anyone was listening, but because the line had been crossed. Pedestrians had started to slow down. A young woman pulled out her phone. A man across the street raised a brow, unsure whether to keep walking or stay and witness what looked more like domination than policing. Jake snapped the cuffs shut around Harrison's wrists with unnecessary force. Harrison didn't flinch. He didn't fight. But as he was walked to the back of the cruiser past growing eyes and camera phones, he turned his head slightly and said low but clear, "You're not ready for what comes next, officer." And with that, he stepped into the police car, still wearing his suit, still in control of himself, still holding back everything he could have said, because Harrison Cole wasn't just another traffic stop, and Jake Warren had just handcuffed the wrong man right in front of the courthouse. Court hadn't started yet, but it was about to. They say the most dangerous people in a room aren't the loud ones. It's the ones who don't flinch, don't explain, don't even blink when they're boxed in. Harrison Cole sat in the holding cell like a man waiting for a delayed flight. Not someone who had just been handcuffed outside a courthouse for no apparent reason. His jacket was folded over his lap. His cuffed hands rested calmly atop it. His eyes scanned nothing in particular. No pacing, no sighs. Just stillness. The kind that either means someone has completely lost control or never gave it up in the first place. Through the glass, Officer Carla Mendez watched him. She wasn't supposed to be on shift that morning. Switched last minute with someone on medical leave. Carla had been working the downtown district long enough to know which arrests would turn messy and which ones would dissolve before the paperwork got filed. But there was something about this man that didn't sit right with her. Not the way he carried himself, not the way he answered Jake, and definitely not the way he was sitting there now like he was timing something. Or someone. She walked past the desk and pulled up the booking file. Name, Harrison Cole. No priors, no warnings, no outstanding anything. His driver's license listed a home in a gated community 3 miles from the mayor's residence. She double-checked, ran the tags. Nothing flagged, not even a parking ticket. Carla glanced toward Jake, who was typing a report like he was trying to outrun second thoughts. She leaned on the counter beside him, not looking directly at him. You ran his plates right? Jake didn't stop typing. Yeah. Everything's clean. I wouldn't have brought him in if it wasn't. She waited a second, then said low and almost casual, You sure this wasn't a misread? Jake looked up sharply. What's that supposed to mean? You pulled him over. He didn't resist. He handed you everything. You brought him in anyway. Jake scoffed. He had an attitude. Carla raised an eyebrow. So we're cuffing people for tone now. Jake stood papers in hand, more defensive than necessary. You weren't there, Carla. You didn't see the way he looked at me. Like I was beneath him. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she walked over to the evidence bin, glanced through the clear bag holding Harrison's belongings. Wallet. Keys. A leather-bound notebook, thick, well-used, tucked inside a black portfolio with the Department of Justice insignia stamped faintly in gold on the corner. She paused. Pulled the tag closer. Jake, she said quietly, holding it up. Did you even look at this? He frowned, took 2 steps forward, and froze mid-breath when he saw the seal. The same emblem printed on federal subpoenas and courtroom walls. He stared for a beat too long, then muttered, Could be a fake. Could be, Carla echoed. But would someone driving a car like that carry a fake DOJ credential holder? Jake didn't answer. His expression shifted not into regret, but into a kind of calculation. Like a man trying to remember if a mistake he made had been recorded. Carla turned back toward the cell. Harrison hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't even looked their way. He simply shifted his eyes toward the clock, checked the time, and let them drift back to the far wall, as if everything happening outside that glass was no more pressing than the hum of the fluorescent light above him. There was no panic in his posture, no protest in his body language, just patience. Quiet, deliberate, measured patience. Carla whispered, He's not like the others. Jake didn't respond. His jaw was locked. His eyes stuck to the folder in her hands. But Carla was already thinking ahead. Not because she felt sorry, not because she was certain of who Harrison Cole really was, but because in all her years in uniform, she had learned one thing people who sit that still in holding. They're not waiting for a lawyer. They're waiting for the door to open for them. And from the way Harrison looked calm as steel behind glass, that door wasn't going to stay closed much longer. The room wasn't full, but it was tense. The kind of tension that doesn't show up in loud voices, but in the way people glance up just a little too often from their files, or the way a court clerk adjusts her glasses more than she needs to. Everyone in that room knew something strange had happened the day before. They just didn't know what yet. Harrison Cole was brought in through the side door without cuffs this time, but still shadowed by the deputy like he was dangerous. He wasn't. But something about his silence unsettled people. He didn't try to look sympathetic. He didn't smile at the judge. He just walked in wearing that charcoal suit like it belonged more to the bench than to the defendant's seat. Officer Jake Warren was already there sitting stiff at the prosecution's side like he couldn't quite get comfortable in his own skin. His report was in his hands, but his grip was too tight. He hadn't said a word since walking into the courtroom. He just kept checking the door and checking Harrison. Judge Evelyn Hardin entered and took her seat. She was sharp even in silence and had been on the bench long enough to know when a case felt off before it even started. She looked down at the docket, raised her head slightly, and said, "Case of the People versus Harrison Cole." Harrison stood. The judge studied him. Then, without skipping a beat, asked Mr. Cole, "Do you have legal counsel present?" There was a pause, brief but deliberate. Then Harrison answered, his voice smooth but cut with something unmistakably firm. "Yes, Your Honor. I do." The judge blinked. "And where is your counsel?" He met her gaze fully. "Standing right here." The silence in the room wasn't immediate. It rolled in slowly, like a wave just behind understanding. "I am a federal prosecutor," Harrison said, "and I will be representing myself in these proceedings." The air shifted. The bailiff's eyebrows raised. A junior attorney 2 rows back whispered something that sounded like a curse. A reporter in the back dropped her pen. And Jake stopped breathing altogether. The judge narrowed her eyes. "You're a federal prosecutor." "I am. Currently serving. I have my credentials with me if the court would like to verify." "Please do." Harrison reached into the slim folder he had brought in and handed a sealed envelope to the deputy who walked it to the bench. The judge opened it, scanned it, then slowly leaned back in her chair. There was a quiet exhale from her, barely audible, but everyone in that room felt it. Jake's shoulders tightened. His jaw flexed. His mind was racing in places his mouth couldn't catch up with. His tongue pressed hard to the roof of his mouth, but he didn't dare speak. Not now. Judge Hardin set the papers down and cleared her throat. "Mr. Cole, it appears your credentials are in order." Harrison gave a single, respectful nod. "Thank you, Your Honor. Do you understand the risks of representing yourself?" "I do, intimately." Jake couldn't hold it in. He turned to the ADA sitting beside him and hissed, "This is a setup." But the ADA didn't even look his way. His eyes were glued to Harrison. Then Harrison turned, not to the judge, not to the clerk, but to Jake directly. And in a voice just loud enough for the room to hear, he said, "It's not a setup, Officer Warren. It's called accountability. Something you've managed to avoid until now." The room stayed still. Harrison faced the judge again. "With the court's permission, I'd like to begin with a motion to dismiss based on unlawful detainment and lack of probable cause." The judge's eyes stayed on him a moment longer than usual. Then she nodded. "Proceed." Jordan Price, sitting near the back, had just started recording. His hand trembled slightly as he whispered into his mic. "The man they cuffed yesterday just took control of the courtroom. And the officer who put him there, he's still figuring out where the exits are." Harrison walked back to the defendant's table. No, not defendant. That word no longer fit him. Not after that entrance. He placed his papers on the table, sat down slowly, and opened his folder. He didn't look around for support. He didn't need the room's approval. What he needed was time, a voice, and a place to speak uninterrupted. And finally, he had all three. You could feel it shift the courtroom. The air, the rhythm of everything right after Harrison declared he'd be representing himself. People leaned in without meaning to. Some crossed their arms, not in defense but in anticipation, as if the floor had just tilted and no one was sure which way they might slide. And at the prosecution's table, an assistant district attorney named Bradley Kerr finally found his voice. He stood, crisp gray suit, perfectly folded pocket square, and a tone that managed to carry confidence and condescension in equal parts. "Your Honor," he said with respect, "I must object. This is highly irregular. The defendant's request to represent himself, especially in a criminal matter involving resisting arrest, puts the integrity of the process at risk. It's not in his best interest." Judge Hardin, still seated with Harrison's federal credentials beside her, didn't respond right away. She simply raised an eyebrow like she was waiting to see if the objection had more weight than its delivery. Harrison didn't wait to be invited. He stepped forward, quiet but steady, and turned slightly toward the bench. "Your Honor, if I may respond." Hardin gave a small nod. Harrison nodded back, then turned fully toward Kerr. "Counsel seems to be confusing discomfort with disorder," he said evenly. "There is nothing irregular about a defendant choosing to represent himself. In fact, it's a right clearly affirmed in Title 28 of the United States Code Section 1654. He let that hang in the room just long enough for a few heads to turn toward the law clerks in the back. Let me be specific, Harrison continued. In all courts of the United States, the parties may plead and conduct their own cases personally. I'm exercising that right, fully aware, fully competent, and absolutely entitled. Kerr tried not to flinch, but he glanced at the judge, hoping for a rescue. Your Honor, with respect, the defendant's legal background doesn't exempt him from the fact that he's facing criminal charges. The risk of self-representation is mine to bear, Harrison said sharply, cutting him off not with rudeness, but with authority. And I'll remind the court that the charges were filed under the same flawed discretion that placed me in handcuffs yesterday morning, with no cause, no explanation, and no justification. Hardin shifted slightly. She looked at Kerr first, then at Harrison. There's precedent, she said carefully, but it's not common. Harrison nodded. It doesn't have to be common, it just has to be lawful. A few rows back, Jordan Price scribbled notes as fast as his hand could move. He knew this wasn't a trial yet. He knew there wouldn't be a verdict today, but it didn't matter. What was unfolding wasn't about outcome. It was about presence. And right now, Harrison Cole had just put an entire courtroom on its heels. Kerr stepped forward again, a last attempt. Your Honor, this isn't about race or title or drama. This is about making sure due process is protected. Harrison turned back, his voice lower but sharper than before. No, counselor. This is about making sure power is questioned. And that starts with me refusing to hand over my defense to the same system that arrested me for existing in a space I had every right to be in. He faced the judge again. His shoulders didn't rise. His voice didn't shake. I will no longer place my defense in the hands of the very system that presumed me guilty the moment I stepped out of my car. Judge Hardin stared at him for a long moment. Her gavel remained untouched. She didn't glance at her clerks. She didn't breathe a word for several seconds. Then finally, she exhaled. Objection denied, she said, voice even. Mr. Cole may proceed with his own defense. And just like that, the tension that had coiled around the courtroom didn't disappear, but it changed shape. What had once felt like skepticism now looked more like silence dressed as respect. Harrison stepped back to his table. He didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He simply opened his folder, took out a single page, and placed it neatly in front of him. Jordan leaned over to the reporter beside him and whispered, I don't know who's on trial anymore. Him or the people who put him here. And at that moment, nobody in that room would have dared answer. The headline dropped like a match on dry grass. Federal prosecutor handcuffed for driving while black, posted at 3:14 p.m. by Jordan Price. By 3:17, it had over 10,000 views. By 3:25, CNN picked it up. By 4:00, the courthouse was surrounded by a wall of reporters and people who weren't willing to sit silent anymore. Jordan didn't add much to the article. Just facts. Just one still photo of Harrison in cuffs, head high. And a single caption, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a message. Back at the precinct, Officer Jake Warren slammed the locker door so hard it echoed down the hallway. He played me, he muttered, pacing. He set this whole damn thing up. Carla Mendez stood near the corner, arms crossed quiet. Jake snapped, You don't see it. The smug way he looked at me like he knew this would happen. Carla's voice was soft but sharp. Or maybe she said he just knew what usually happens. Jake froze. For a moment, it felt like someone had flipped the air in the room. Meanwhile, across town, Harrison was being doxxed. Someone inside the department no one dared say who leaked his home address and phone number to a private Facebook group. From there, it spread like wildfire. Within an hour, Harrison's inbox was a storm of anonymous rage slurs, threats, images of nooses, maps to his front door. One message read, You may wear a suit, but you'll always be what you are. Harrison said nothing. He didn't respond, didn't delete. He powered off his phone and returned to the notes on his desk. The only light in the room was the lamp over a thick legal binder labeled U.S. v. Cole. But his eyes weren't on the binder. They were staring just past it, somewhere else entirely. That's when Carla made her decision. She waited until the precinct thinned out. Then she pulled up the dashcam footage from the stop. She watched it once, then again. She paused on the moment Jake grabbed Harrison's wrist. No hesitation, no probable cause, just heat and power colliding. She copied the footage to a private flash drive, At 11:03 p.m., she called a number she hadn't dialed in years. Gabe, it's Carla Mendez. Yeah, I need you to see something. Off the record. You're the only one I trust with this. On the other end, the civil rights lawyer didn't ask why. He only asked, is someone in danger? She exhaled. Maybe not yet. But if we don't move fast, someone will be. By morning, the city had changed. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown from a few voices into a wall of sound. Some chanted Harrison's name. Others held signs, driving while black isn't a crime. We stand with Prosecutor Cole. If he can be cuffed, so can any of us. In the center of the crowd, Jordan Price filmed live. His voice crackled through the feed. This isn't just about one arrest. This is about who gets to claim justice and who gets dragged through it. But Harrison remained silent. No press conference, no emotional video, no Instagram live. When asked by a local news anchor for comment, his only statement was relayed through a court clerk. Mr. Cole believes the courtroom is where truth belongs, and he intends to put it there. And yet, silence has its own weight. It made people lean in, it made them listen harder, and it made Jake sweat. You think he's coming after me? Jake barked the next day, slamming his badge on his desk. You think he's just gonna sit there and play the victim? Carla didn't flinch. She met his eyes steady. No, she said. I think he's playing chess. And you just kicked over the wrong piece. Jake opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Somewhere across the city, Harrison stood in front of a mirror. He didn't fix his tie. He didn't practice his lines. He simply looked at his reflection and whispered, "Let's begin." And outside, the world watched. Not because he screamed, but because even in silence, Harrison Cole made the system tremble. The courtroom was full, but you could hear a single pen click from the back row. The air felt heavy, like the building itself knew that what was about to unfold wouldn't be forgotten. Not today. Harrison Cole stood alone at the front, a single sheet of paper in his hand. No fancy slideshow, no special effects, just names. 3 of them. Your Honor, he said, voice calm but tight. Today I won't speak as a man defending himself. I will speak on behalf of those who never made it this far. If the court allows, I'd like to call my first witness. The judge gave a slow nod. Evelyn Hardin's eyes held something different now. Less steel, more weight. A bailiff opened the side door and a teenager stepped in. 17, maybe 18, skinny, nervous. He kept his eyes low, but his hands shook as he took the oath. His name was Jamal Hayes. Harrison walked closer gently, like guiding someone across a frozen lake. Jamal, he asked softly, do you remember the day Officer Warren stopped you? The boy nodded. Yeah, I was walking home from my cousin's. Did you have anything illegal on you? No, sir. Were you doing anything suspicious? No, just wearing a hoodie, I guess. A pause. What happened? Jamal glanced at the judge, then at Jake Warren, who sat rigid at the defense table. He told me to put my hands up, asked why I was lurking, then pushed me against the hood of his car. He kept saying, people like you never learn. Over and over. The room shifted. Eyes turned to Jake, who stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Thank you, Jamal Harrison said, his voice warm. You can sit. Next came a woman in her 40s. She wore a denim jacket and carried a photo of her daughter. Her name was Monique Travis. I was with my daughter at the park, she began. She had ice cream. We were laughing. Then, Officer Warren ran up yelling about a report of a stolen phone. Harrison raised a brow. Did he have any reason to suspect you? Monique's mouth trembled. Only that we were the only black family on that side of the park. And what happened next? He shoved me. In front of my child. I fell. Sprained my wrist. I screamed her name. She was crying so hard she couldn't breathe. But he kept shouting, you people think you're always innocent. A gasp moved through the courtroom like wind through tall grass. Monique wiped her eyes. I filed a complaint. Nothing happened. They said he was just doing his job. Jake didn't blink. Harrison's voice dropped low. And your daughter, she still wakes up screaming. Silence, crushing. Thank you, Ms. Travis, Harrison said before turning to the final door. The third witness was older, late 60s, maybe 70. A white man in a military jacket. He walked with a cane, but his spine was straight as a post. He looked Officer Warren dead in the eye. State your name, Harrison asked. Franklin Reeves, retired Navy. And your experience with Officer Warren? Franklin's voice was steady. I saw him pull over a young black couple. They hadn't done anything. He was screaming, hand on his gun. I stepped in. told him to calm down. What was his response? He turned to me and said, "I don't take orders from traitors." Called me a disgrace for defending a pair of kids who'd done nothing wrong. Harrison paused, letting that settle. "And are you a disgrace, Mr. Reeves?" The old man smiled just a little. "No, son. I've worn my country's flag on my chest. The disgrace is sitting over there." Jake flinched, barely, but he did. As Mr. Reeves stepped down, Harrison turned to the judge and reached into his briefcase. "I'd now like to submit into evidence dashcam footage from my own arrest." The version submitted by the arresting officer was edited, but this, he held up the flash drive, is the original, provided by Officer Carla Mendez. Jake's eyes widened. The footage played. No one spoke. It was all there. Jake's sneer, Harrison's calm voice, the phrase, "You think this car makes you better than me?" and then the handcuffs. No cause, no escalation, just power and ego. And beneath Jake's breath, picked up by the mic, the same words used with Jamal and Monique. "People like you never learn." When the footage ended, Harrison stood still for a moment. Then he turned back to the room. Not just the judge, not just the lawyers, but the people packed into the benches, the press, the guards, the clerk, everyone. "When I was thrown against that car, I wasn't afraid," he said. "Not for myself. I've seen worse. But I thought of all the people who can't wear this suit, who don't have a law degree, who can't speak in rooms like this." He looked toward Jake now. "I wasn't arrested. I was reminded that no matter how high I climb, some will still only see the color of my skin. And that's why I'm standing here, not for revenge, but for truth." He walked slowly back to his table. "I won't argue for myself today," he said, voice almost a whisper. "I will speak for those who never made it to this room." Evelyn Harden said nothing. Her gavel rested quietly in front of her. Her eyes were on the table. For the first time since taking the bench that morning, she wasn't presiding. She was listening. And the courtroom, still, it didn't erupt, didn't cheer, it just breathed. Because for the first time in that building's history, justice didn't roar. It waited. And it heard a voice it had long silenced. There was no ceremony when Jake Warren was summoned. No handshake. No badge salute, just a silent hallway and the dull creak of the door closing behind him. He sat alone in front of the internal review board. The air felt heavier than usual, not because of what they said, but because of what they didn't have to. Every question pointed back to the same thing: intent. Not protocol, not procedure. But why? "Did you feel threatened, Officer Warren?" He blinked slowly. He looked smug. That answer changed the temperature in the room. The panel didn't respond, not verbally, but the silence that followed cut deeper than any reprimand. Jake walked out of that hearing not with a suspension, not with a verdict, but with a seed planted right in the center of his conscience. Later that evening, Jake stood outside the house he grew up in. Porch light flickering, screen door creaking. The home had aged the way he hadn't noticed until now, weathered, quiet, tired. His mother, Grace Warren, was already waiting in the living room, her knitting resting on her lap, but untouched. He tried to offer his usual half-smile. "You hungry?" she asked. "I'm fine, Ma." They sat in a silence that wasn't unfamiliar, but tonight it was thick. Jake finally looked up and noticed the old photograph still hanging on the wall, his father in uniform beaming in black and white. A soldier, a man of color, a proud American. Grace caught his gaze. "If your father were still alive," she said, voice low, measured, but laced with something he hadn't heard from her in years, "and you'd pulled him over, dressed like that, would you have cuffed him too?" Jake couldn't speak. She didn't push the question, just looked down at her lap again. But her silence hit harder than any scolding ever could. That night, Jake sat at the edge of his childhood bed, scrolling through his old case files one by one. A boy 16 pulled in for walking home with a hoodie. A mother detained for disorderly conduct while crying over a towed car. And then the file labeled simply Cole H. He stared at that one the longest. At 2:14 a.m. his phone buzzed. A message. Carla Mendez. "I can't ride with you anymore, Jake. Not like this. Not until you see it. No anger, no lectures. Just a line that felt more like a door closing than a friend turning away." He left the house, wandered to the bathroom down the hall, and turned on the dim mirror light. For the first time in his adult life, Jake didn't see a badge when he looked in the mirror. He didn't see authority. He didn't even see control. What he saw was a man who had built his sense of order on fear. A man who confused silence for superiority, who mistook control for justice. And now, stripped of all the noise, the reflection looked lost. His hand gripped the edge of the sink, not in anger, but in the quiet desperation of someone trying not to fall apart. In the corner of the mirror, that same photograph of his father still hung on the hallway wall behind him, half in light, half in shadow. And in that moment, Jake wasn't a cop. He was just a son wondering how far he'd strayed from the man who taught him right from wrong. No one told Harrison about the letter. It wasn't announced, wasn't slipped in by a clerk or courier. It arrived in a plain envelope hand-delivered to the front desk by someone who didn't leave a name. Only the handwriting on the front, to Mr. Harrison Cole. He held it in his hand for a long while before opening it. Not because he was afraid of the contents, but because he already knew. Sometimes words carry weight long before they're read. The paper was unlined, the ink slightly smudged in places, as if whoever wrote it had to start over, breathe through it. Harrison. There's no excuse. There never was. I saw what I wanted to see, and I let fear do the rest. I thought the badge gave me clarity. Now I see it blinded me. You didn't raise your voice, didn't resist. You simply stood there, and that alone made me feel threatened. That should haunt me. And it does. I know silence won't undo what was done, but this silence yours has been louder than anything I've ever heard. I see now, but I should have seen earlier. Jake Warren. Harrison finished reading it slowly, his face unreadable. His hands folded the paper once clean and precise, and slipped it into the inner pocket of his briefcase alongside case files and federal documents and a legal pad he hadn't used in days. He didn't tear it up, didn't crumple it, didn't sigh or shake his head. He just kept moving. That afternoon, sunlight poured through the tall windows of his office at the Department of Justice. Outside, chants echoed from the steps below, voices rising, signs held high, people demanding reform with the kind of urgency that couldn't be delayed anymore. Justice for the unheard, justice for the unseen. Harrison stood quietly, his hands in his pockets, watching the sea of protesters grow. He wasn't startled when someone entered his office behind him. Jordan Price's camera, still hanging from her neck, leaned against the doorway. She had caught the delivery earlier that day, the moment he had pulled the letter from the envelope. She hadn't read the letter, of course, but she saw how he held it, saw how he said nothing. She didn't ask for a quote. Instead, she later posted a single photo, a still image of Harrison's hand slipping the letter into his case, the edges just visible beneath the flap. The caption read, "Forgiveness is not owed, and silence speaks volumes." The post spread fast, not just because of who Harrison was, but because so many people had been waiting to see how he would respond. But that's just it. He didn't respond. No statement, no press conference, no emotional speech calling for grace. And that somehow hit harder than any headline could. Later, as the office lights dimmed and the streets below began to fill with the golden tint of dusk, Harrison remained at the window. He didn't move, didn't speak. His fingers tapped lightly against the windowsill in a rhythm only he understood. Someone knocked on his door quietly. His assistant peeked in. "Sir, the governor's team called. They want to know if you'll be giving a statement tomorrow." He didn't turn from the window. "No." She hesitated. "Should I tell them you'll follow up?" Still watching the crowd outside, he shook his head. "They'll hear it when it's time." That night, in the quiet of his home, he poured himself a glass of water and placed the briefcase on the dining table. He didn't reopen it. He didn't reach for the letter again. He just let it sit there as if waiting was its own kind of justice. Some things don't need an answer. Some things echo louder in silence. And Harrison Cole had learned long ago the courtroom wasn't the only place truth was spoken. The courtroom wasn't packed, but it was full. Not with noise, not with chaos, but with breath held just beneath the surface, like everyone knew this day would shift something deeper than a headline. The walls didn't echo with gasps or camera clicks, just the weight of waiting. Judge Evelyn Hardin walked in with a face carved from stone. Not cold, not cruel, just impossibly composed. She didn't look at Harrison. She didn't look at Jake Warren. Not at first. She looked forward. Her fingers curled gently over the edge of the bench, and when she spoke, it was steady, like a gavel falling in slow motion. In the matter of Officer Jake Warren's conduct, This court has reviewed the submitted evidence, including body cam footage, sworn testimony, and independent documentation regarding his pattern of racially motivated stops. She paused not for effect, but for breath. While the court acknowledges that no criminal charges have yet been filed, the evidence warrants immediate action. Officer Warren is hereby suspended without pay for a period of 6 months pending the results of an ongoing civil investigation. Furthermore, this court orders that the entire Eastward Police Department undergo mandatory federal anti-bias training under the oversight of the Civil Rights Division. A stir moved through the room like wind, not applause, not protest. Just the collective shifting of people realizing something had cracked open. Jake didn't move. His uniform looked heavier now, like it clung to him out of habit rather than honor. He didn't look surprised, just hollow. Judge Hardin continued, her voice softening just slightly. In the matter of Mr. Harrison Cole, this court finds that the traffic stop was unlawful. The charges of obstruction and resisting arrest are dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Cole, you are free to go. Harrison nodded once. He didn't smile, didn't flinch. It was the kind of silence that spoke not of relief, but of knowing this verdict had to happen not for him, but for everyone watching. Then came the last part. And finally, Judge Hardin said, her tone shifting just enough to make the room still again. This court recognizes the professional conduct and restraint shown by Mr. Cole during proceedings. In consultation with the governor's office, and upon recommendation from the State Judiciary Committee, Mr. Cole has been appointed Special Advisor to the State Commission on Justice and Equity. A beat passed, then another. No one clapped, no one cheered. It wasn't that they weren't proud. It was that it didn't feel like celebration. It felt like the end of a long storm. Not sunshine, just dry land. As people slowly began to file out, murmurs rippled along the aisles, reporters quietly packing up their gear, law students taking notes. They'd never forget civilians holding their coats like armor against a system they hoped might finally be listening. Jake stood slowly. His badge had already been turned in that morning. There was nothing left to carry. He didn't look at Harrison, but Harrison looked at him, only for a second. Not with hatred, not even with pity. Just with eyes that had seen too much and still chose not to look away. Outside the courthouse, Jordan Price leaned against a railing, scrolling through the early headlines. Her article was already live. Justice isn't always loud. But today it was clear. She looked up and saw Harrison emerge through the tall double doors, alone. No entourage, no applause. Just the weight of the world carried with the posture of someone who refused to be bowed by it. She raised her camera, but he raised a hand not to stop her, but to wave almost imperceptibly. Not to her, just to the moment. Like he was acknowledging that this chapter was done. Maybe justice didn't look like fireworks or speeches. Maybe it looked like someone walking out of a courthouse head high, words few, future wide open. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The auditorium wasn't grand, but it was full in the way that matters most. No suits shouting to be heard. No reporters fighting for angles. Just citizens, students, and public servants gathered not for a verdict this time, but for a conversation. At the front of the room stood Harrison Cole, no longer a defendant, not just a prosecutor, now something quieter and deeper, a man with truth in his hands and nothing left to prove. He didn't clear his throat or tap the microphone. When he spoke, it was the kind of voice that settled over the room like steady rain, calm but impossible to ignore. You can't change the past, he began. You can't undo what's been done, not the stops, not the silences, not the sentences, passed in rooms that never saw your name with respect. But you can shape what justice means tomorrow. He looked around not to impress, but to connect. Justice isn't a ceremony. It's a decision. Made one small choice at a time. One raised hand. One word that doesn't go unsaid. The room held its breath as he continued. I didn't stand in court to clear my name. I stood there because there are thousands who never made it to the stand. Because someone has to go first so others don't have to go alone. He didn't linger on applause. He just stepped down, shook a few hands, and left the podium the way he came in, quietly, like a man who'd done what needed doing and now had other work to do. Across town, in a room with scuffed walls and folding chairs, Jake Warren stood before a group of new recruits at a local community center. No badge on his chest now, no belt around his waist. Just a folder, a slideshow, and a worn face that had learned to live with what it used to deny. He showed them the footage. He showed them himself. He let them see everything. "This was me," Jake said, his voice steady but stripped bare. "This is what happens when you wear the uniform but forget who it's for. This is what happens when power makes you deaf to perspective." One recruit raised his hand. "Why are you telling us this?" Jake paused. "Because no one told me." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't expect redemption. But he gave a warning that came from a place rules could never reach a life lived the wrong way until truth burned its way in. Later that week outside the courthouse, the light hit differently. It was late afternoon, one of those days where even the sun seemed tired but determined. Harrison stepped outside his jacket slung over his arm and stood still for a moment at the top of the courthouse steps. Jordan Price stood nearby, her camera already lowered, not recording, just watching. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Because this moment wasn't about volume. It was about weight and meaning and what it costs to carry both. She would later write, "He didn't fight to win. He fought so no one else would have to." And that was the truth. 2 men, 2 roads, 1 truth. Justice doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins the moment someone decides to break a cycle and chooses not to look away. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's a quiet choice made by someone who refuses to look away. Harrison didn't raise his voice, but he raised a mirror. And in that reflection, we saw something deeper than law. The cost of silence, the strength of restraint, and the power of standing up when the system wants you to sit down. If this story moved you, if it made you think, feel, or even pause for a moment, please take a second to like this video. Share it with someone who still believes that one voice can make a difference. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, true stories of dignity, resilience, and the quiet pursuit of justice, make sure to subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories. Your support means more than you know. It fuels our team to keep uncovering the untold, to keep giving voice to the silenced, and to keep telling stories that don't just entertain, but matter. At Mr. Mac's Stories, we don't just tell what happened. We help you remember why it should never be forgotten.